terminology. We use the terminology tangled titles, but some people refer to this as heirs properties as well. Heirs property is primarily what people in the South used to describe these issues. And there's been work going on in the South much longer than in the North to resolve these issues. In the South, they mainly focus around farmland and the issues surrounding farmland ownership. Here in the North, it's more about home ownership, but the issues are more or less the same. So tangled titles in a broad sense could be any sort of inheritance issue with the property. So if you own the property, or if you believe you own the property, I should say, and you act as homeowner, you're presenting yourself as the homeowner, but you don't actually have the legal title in your name, that would be what we would consider a tangled title. Roughly 80 to 90% of the time this issue comes up, what you're going to see is it's going to be either a parent or a grandparent, sometimes even a great-grandparent that originally owned the property. When they became deceased, they didn't leave a will to transfer the property to the next person in line in the line of succession. So it basically just sits as is. So even though that person is deceased and the line of succession would give that to their children or their spouse, the work actually hasn't been done to transfer that title over into that person's name. And that can create issues, a lot of different issues surrounding the home. And it's something that you really want to get cleared up as soon as possible, because for most people, they don't realize this is a problem until it's, I shouldn't say too late, but they don't realize it until they actually have a problem in front of them that they need resolved. And then the barrier of not having the title gets in the way and becomes another issue that needs to get resolved. So it makes problems more complicated. It can just make life more difficult generally for people. So I just wanted to offer some examples. There's not a lot of data in Montgomery County on this, but Pew Charitable Trust did a very, very in-depth research into Philadelphia County and the city of Philadelphia and their tangled title issues back in 2021. So I thought it'd be a good idea just to kind of show, use Philadelphia as an example and show how Philadelphia has been trying to handle these problems. So this comes from that study, the Pew Charitable Trust study. This is a map of Philadelphia. It shows the percentage of residential properties with tangled titles. So the blue, and the darker the blue is, the higher that number is going to be, with the very dark navy blue being anywhere from 4.5% to 6.5% of all of the tangled titles, all of the properties in the area having a tangled title. So you can see based on the map, it's most predominantly an issue in North Philadelphia as well as Southwest Philadelphia. Those are the two communities that have issues with tangled title the most, or at least have the most unresolved tangled titles at that point in time. It's much lower in areas like Center City and the far Northeast. But not only geographically, there's also a racial component to this as well. So this also comes from that study. It talks about the race and ethnicity of these census tracts, these same census tracts where people have tangled title issues. So in that same very dark blue category where it was 4.5% to 6.5% of the properties that have tangled title issues, you can see about 87% of those properties are held by Black homeowners. And compare that down to the bottom 10%, where there's 0 to 0.4% of tangled title issues. Pretty much this isn't a problem in those neighborhoods. That would be 62% white to 13% Black. So as you notice, as you go up and as the percent of tangled titles increases, there's a pretty direct correlation between the race and ethnicity of the homeowner and the percentage of likelihood that you're going to have a tangled title. So there is a racial justice component to this as well, because this issue tends to find itself much more commonly in Black and Hispanic households than it does in white households. So back to my original point about why do tangled title issues matter? A lot of people will say, well, I pay the property taxes down and I don't have a mortgage, so it's fine. Why would I need it to get this squared away? I don't have any issues right now. Here's a few of the common issues. This is an exhaustive list, but it's a few of the more common issues that this can present itself in. So if you want to obtain a mortgage or a loan on the property, you need to have proof of ownership in order to do that. Same thing with accessing utility programs. If you're trying to get into something like LIHEAP or a payment plan on your water bill, for example, those also require proof of ownership. Same thing with tax payment programs. If you needed to get into a payment plan to pay off the property taxes, they need proof of ownership in order to get into that payment plan. Home repairs and homeowners insurance have the same thing. They also require proof of ownership. Anytime you want to sell the property, that's probably the most important one that people will notice. If you can't sell the property if you don't own it, so you need to have the title in your name in order to actually make a sale on the property. And it also helps build and preserve intergenerational wealth. I think that's the most important component for me personally. I think that really one of the easiest ways to lift a family out of poverty is to help keep a home in the family. If they can inherit a home and from a parent or a grandparent, rather than have that go in a sheriff's sale or a tax sale back to a bank or to the city or borough, then that home stay and all that equity and value stays in the family, and they can inherit it, live there. They could sell the home and use that money to buy a new place. So it helps preserve wealth within the family, which is really crucial and really important to economic stability. So one of the barriers to this, and this is something that legal aid struggles with a lot, are the costs associated with clearing a Tangled title. The legal process is relatively straightforward. There's a few forms that need to get filed. It all goes through the Register of Wills office. It's relatively straightforward, but the issue is the costs that get associated with those filings. So between if there's a home associated with the estate, sometimes people have Tangled title issues that don't involve a home. If the person was a renter, then this might not be a come up, and it could be personal property, cars, bank accounts, and such. That's incredibly simpler, much cheaper. But if there's a home involved in the Tangled title issue, then it becomes a very expensive process. So you would have to have a title report on the home just to make sure there aren't any other outstanding claims on the property beyond yours. There's the probate filing fees through the Register of Wills. They can run anywhere from $300 to $500, depending on the value of the estate. You need to have death and birth certificates to verify that the person is actually deceased. Those cost a little bit of money. Recording the deed costs money. But then the largest chunk of change out of all of that is going to be the inheritance taxes. So anytime you inherit a property through this probate process, you're going to have to pay the inheritance tax in order to transfer it down. And that's incredibly variable. It depends on the cost. It depends mainly on the value of the property. But there is a payment plan option for that. So that's not something you have to pay in one lump sum. You can get into a payment plan to pay it down over time, which is incredibly helpful. But you need all of these other things in line in order to get into the payment plan. Because back to the earlier slide talking about why Tangled title issues matter, you would need, in order to get into a tax payment program, you need to have proof of ownership, but it's not going to be finalized at this point. So the things like the death certificate and the filing fees are all important in that sense. So you can prove to the Register of Wills that you are in the process of probating, and they can get a payment plan set up for you. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's a big barrier to entry to folks, and something we work with a lot, trying to find ways to lower these costs, as well as to get as many people through the Tangled title probate process as we can without breaking our own bank. We tend to take these on a case-by-case basis right now. As the issues come up, most often it'll be a situation where we're already working with a client on another issue. It might be a mortgage foreclosure, it might be a bankruptcy, it could be a list of different things. But if we're already working with them and then we notice there's a Tangled title issue, usually we will continue to work with them and take this on as an additional case for the same person. We do take referrals. But like I said, it comes on a case-by-case basis, just because these costs can be incredibly prohibitive for the work. But there are ways to, like I said, there are ways to lower it, and I have a slide in here talking about that. There's some advocacy going on, and other cities have had successes with different programs that can help lower these costs. So I included this link in here. I won't take too much time to talk about it, but the Philadelphia has a program called the Tangled Title Fund. It's actually funded through the city of Philadelphia government. And then it's administered by this organization called Philly VIP. They're a nonprofit in the city of Philadelphia. I actually used to be an intern at Philadelphia VIP back when I was in law school. So that's some of my prior experience working with this. So Philadelphia residents actually have a pretty easy time with this, because what you can do is you can start working with the nonprofits like Legal Aid, and then put in an application for the Tangled Title Fund. And then the Tangled Title Fund will then provide you a small grant that can help cover all of those costs, like the filing fees and the inheritance taxes and so on and so forth. So they have a great model for that. It's something that we're trying to emulate in other places throughout the state, and really grow and expand to beyond Philadelphia. But in the meantime, there are other ways to do it, and get the cost lowered. So I mentioned those fees that come through the Register of Wills. Under the state statute that governs the Register of Wills, I included the language in here. So it says, the relevant part here that I have kind of italicized says, the Register of Wills may establish, increase, decrease, modify, or eliminate fees and charges with the approval of the president judge. So basically, these fees are discretionary to the Register of Wills. They can raise them, they can lower them, they can waive them, so on and so forth. So, with this recent election cycle, a new Register of Wills coming in, so maybe it's, some places have an incumbent that's the same person, but we're trying to build those partnerships with the Register of Wills office, raise a lot of these issues to them, explain the importance of making sure these titles are cleared, and that costs are really the main barrier to making sure that happens. So the Register of Wills can waive those fees in certain circumstances, and we're hoping that, through advocacy and outreach, that we can hopefully one day have something akin to a low-income waiver for folks at the Register of Wills. And same thing with the Department of Records. The Department of Records has a couple of small fees that they can waive or modify if they so choose, and those can also help lower costs going forward for folks. There's the cost of death and birth certificates. They're not incredibly expensive. They're only $20 each, but these little fees start to add up. $20 here, $20 there. Oh, there's enough of these types of fees that it can become very expensive. So even any way you can get to waive a fee or find something that can sponsor that would be beneficial and help get these titles cleared for folks. And then any fundraising efforts specific to these costs is something that Legal Aid is working on, trying to apply for grants or develop grants that can help address the Tangled title crisis and get some more folks working on this throughout the Montgomery County. And I wanted to mention, so there's there's preventative work around this as well. So there's the Tangled title work. If we've reached the point where the person is deceased and they have not left a will, that's when we enter the Tangled title or probate phase. And we do this work. We file the right paperwork, get the title cleared up, and it's all possible, but it can be harder than it needs to. So I always make sure to include a slide talking about the preventative work. Before it gets to that point, you can always, community education and client education is really important part of this. We do estate planning, so Legal Aid offers wills and power of attorney, advanced healthcare directives, things of this nature. These documents will prevent this issue going forward. So if you have a will and that will clearly says, I want to leave my property to so-and-so, then when the time comes, you won't have a probate issue or a Tangled title issue, and this work is completely avoided. So we always encourage folks in our community education and in our outreach to start thinking about that. Make sure you have a will in place, because like I said, if you have one, then this doesn't need to become an issue at all. And we try and educate all kinds of folks about this as well. Philadelphia County does a lot of outreach through funeral homes. They actually passed a local ordinance that funeral homes are required when they bring someone in to prepare them for the funeral, that they are required to notify the family and educate them on probate issues and wills and power of attorney and so on. So that's one way to start doing that education, is to have the funeral homes involved in doing the outreach. Other community groups, churches, nonprofits, anywhere people find themselves really can be a way to educate and empower them with this knowledge that just having a will can avoid all these problems going forward. We partner with elected officials as well to try and share this knowledge and do the outreach however we can. Because like I said, if we can stop this before it gets to that point, then you won't have tangled title issues. And that doesn't mean we can't do anything about tangled titles, but like I was mentioning before, with the costs and so on, it can be a much more difficult process if you don't have one in place than if you do have one in place. So we always encourage folks to do that. And then what are the benefits of the work? So I mentioned earlier, building and preserving intergenerational wealth. That's probably the biggest benefit. I mean, keeping a large six-figure asset in someone's family is most often going to be their biggest asset. So it can help keep intergenerational wealth in the same family. It can help promote racial justice, because most of these issues tend to find themselves in Black and brown households. So it's a really good way to help preserve intergenerational wealth. It also helps community stabilization, helps keep people in their homes in the first place. People, if they have the title to their home and they can get their payment plans squared away, get their utilities taken care of, they can apply for home repair grants, they can do all the things that a normal homeowner would be able to do that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do without the title. So it helps keep the community looking better. There won't be blight, vacant homes with roofs coming off. All of these types of things can be addressed by making sure the right people have the title in their name, and then they can get the repair funds that they need to keep their homes looking nice. And then potential reuniting of families. That's always a big one too. So people that would want to live in that home that might have hesitations because of the ownership issue or the title issue can then move into the place when they get the title in their name. So it helps bring, in a literal sense, it helps bring families together, keeps them under the same roof, and helps keep the family strong. So that's always a great way to support your community through a pretty simple legal process here. And that's all the slides I have. I just wanted to include our information on the end about legal aid. I'm happy to talk more about any specific legal questions, any general legal questions. Open the floor to Q&A. I'm happy to share any additional info that people might have.
I have a question.
Sure.
First, I apologize for not being on screen. The camera facing me isn't working, so that's the back of me. I'm a mortgage loan officer in the Philadelphia area and have been for too many years. I haven't run into tangled title issues. When you buy a property and you get a mortgage, you're required to get title insurance. And so to that extent, I know that you're talking about inherited properties where there's tangled issues. I've never run into what you're describing because I sell mortgages, but title insurance seems like it would clear it up, wouldn't it? If somebody owns a home and they bought the home and they want to pass the home down, there's a title insurance policy that pretty much protects them from any liens on the property that need to be cleared up, or proof that they own it. The title insurance stands in front of that. No, is that right?
In certain circumstances, yeah. The title insurance usually is more geared towards the buyer than the seller, though. It protects the buyer from any issues that might pop up with the title. The seller really, and you might know the specifics more than I would, given your background, but my understanding is that a seller wouldn't even be able to obtain title insurance until they had shown a title report showing that they had the title free and clear, so then it could be insured in the first place. So I think this is something that would need to get resolved before it actually got to that point, which might be why you haven't seen the issue pop up.
Okay.
Can I ask, is there a cultural issue involved? Sandy and I were just exchanging notes about this. I felt when I was a legal aid lawyer that there was a very high level of trust within the Black community, that it would be, I remember a situation where everybody gathered after a death and they all agreed so-and-so should have the house because he had cared for the elders and he wasn't even a blood relative. And when another lawyer challenged it in another matter, I said, well, he said, what's your proof that he owns it? And I said, let me introduce you to Aunt Bertha. And literally, is there a cultural thing at all? I mean, I'm interested in wasn't aware of all the costs involved, but a mistrust, a trust within the family, but a mistrust of authorities when it comes to Black people's property. Well, a well-earned mistrust, I think.
Right, right. Well, first off, thank you for your work as a legal aid attorney. It's always nice to meet a fellow legal aid person. But to answer your question, I do think there is a bit of a cultural component to it. I think the bigger issue, though, is just the educational component to it. I think a lot of people don't really understand what a tangled title is. I think most people I've worked in don't even realize they're in this situation until they're trying to do something with the property. Usually it's applying for LIHEAP or applying for the property tax rebate program or something to that effect. And then they say, oh, I need proof of ownership. How do I do that? And then that's when we start having these conversations and getting into it. I think the other issue as well is when there's no will, people tend to make assumptions about what that person might have wanted because there's no document there that speaks to what they would have wanted. So it can create issues in that sense where people in the family might just try and trust each other and say, well, this is like how I think things would have gone, but maybe it's just because I think like a lawyer, but really like having a will and having some sort of guiding document that's very clear about what that person wanted is the best way to really like avoid all of these problems, because then you don't have to speculate about what they would have wanted or who they might have wanted to be the executor of the estate. And
do you have any thoughts as to why there's fewer wills, though? Is that also a I'm suggesting cultural? I don't know.
I can offer my opinion on it. I was actually talking about this last week. I think wills tend to be difficult to get people to think about because the next step in that thought process is, well, that means I'm going to die. And people just don't want to think about that seriously. It's a heavy thought to have to sit with. And I'm young. I got plenty of time to worry about this. It's never going to come up. And it's, it can be very from the truth, right? Like you never know when your last day is going to be, and it's important to have this stuff squared away for when that time does come and when you do need it, because you don't want to be rushing and throwing something together, or even worse, you don't want to pass away and not have one at all, because then you could find yourself in this situation. So I think people just have this kind of apprehension about seriously sitting down and thinking about like what their estate planning goals are and what they want to do with all of this stuff. In my opinion, at least, reasonable minds could differ on why people are this way about it, but I think that's a large part of it.
Charlie, I have a question.
Sure.
If the work is done and the title is unentangled, then that part is complete. Then should we not be thinking really all of it is like a package process to make sure that whoever inherits this does not have the problems that they currently had to go through? And so if you say that's the reason we're doing it, see all you had to go through, we want to make sure whoever comes next is not going to have to do all that. So if we're going to do this work, try to make it all I mean, we've only accomplished half of it unless we
No.
get the next will written by that person.
100%. Yep, you definitely have the right idea on this, and that's how we try and handle these situations when we take them on at legal aid. The will and the Tangled title issue go hand in hand. So if there wasn't one in place before, once we finish all this work, get the title cleared up, get it into their name, the first thing we're doing is encouraging them to make a will, because now it's theirs and it's something that they have control over. So they need to put something into writing about when they pass this along, who that's going to go to, and it can help, hopefully at least, it can hopefully end that cycle and stop it by having a will in place and making sure that it's properly transferred going forward.
I think I noticed somewhere online where you can actually make a will online without with much less expense. Is that something you encourage or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wills are much simpler to make than I think people realize. So there's actually a process called a holographic will.
What's the word?
Basically what it means is, as long as it's in your handwriting and you signed it, then it's valid. It doesn't need to be notarized, doesn't need any fancy seal on it. You can take out a pen and paper, write down, my name is so-and-so, here's what I have, here's what I'm leaving it to, sign it on the bottom, and that would be good enough. The courts would consider that a valid will. So it's really
dated too, or there's a date on it. I mean,
yeah, and and that we always encourage folks to talk to lawyers just to make sure that they have all of the things that they need in the will, that they're not missing any information, because sometimes people might not consider all of the things that need to go into it, like the timing and making sure they have all of their estate considered in the will. So it's always good to talk to an attorney just to make sure that you have all of the boxes checked, so to speak. But really, anybody can do this on their own. It's a pretty straightforward process. You just need to kind of itemize all of your things you own, and then make a dispersion of who's getting what. And as long as everything's accounted for, then that's really about it.
Charlie, if I can answer the title insurance question. Title insurance is typically backward looking. It says, as of today's date, this is the state of the title. So if the claim associated with the Tangled title happened before that date, there was an estate that wasn't probated, then that'll be the liability of the title company. But I think the more typical fact pattern is that there's title insurance for a mortgage. 10 years later, the insured dies, leave intestate, and then the kids have the property. And in that case, the title insurance doesn't help you at all. A couple of questions. Inheritance tax in Pennsylvania is 4.5% of the gross value, I believe, of real estate to a lineal descendant. So, you're talking, if a house is worth $100,000, you're talking obviously about $4,500. That's real money.
Right.
And my memory is that the mortgage amount is not netted out. I could be mistaken on that. But in any case, it's potentially a material amount of money. You need valuations as of the date of death. Is that typically by a letter from a realtor or an appraisal? How finicky is the register of wills on that stuff? And do you have any advice? And then I have a follow-up question.
So it can vary, but typically the register of wills are going to look at the property assessment through the city or the borough, whichever if the property finds itself in. Whatever they use to base your property taxes, that assessed value is typically the same one that they're going to use for.
And they'll multiply that by the common level ratio, and that will relate to something or not in terms of value. Okay, that's easy. The second question is, I recognize the fact that every one of these projects is going to be different. But for a lot of years, I lived my life with checklists of things that needed to be done. I was a commercial real estate lawyer, and whether you were doing a loan on an office building or buying a piece of property, there was a long list of things that needed to be checked. Do you have something like that and I've been just making notes of the Social Security Death Index and sources of information, city directories. the kind of a list of resources and hurdles, ancestry.com to figure out, or, that sort of thing for understanding family trees. Do you have a checklist that you could share?
I do actually. Yeah, I'm just looking for it now on my computer. I'd be glad to share it after this call out. I can send it out through an email. But yeah, we have exactly that. We have basically a checklist of items like to make sure that you address all of these things before you file it. And it's geared towards lawyers that work on these cases pro bono. So it's got a lot more of the nuts and bolts that I think you'd be looking for in there.
That would be helpful. And a shout out to Anime, because I had failed to make the connection between getting the title untangled and the need to keep it from getting untangled again, and encouraging people to make sure they have wills. It's critical. Anyway, that's all.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think that was a really great point too. I always kind of use the revolving door analogy because tangled titles can be a problem that keeps coming in one door, out the same door over and over again with the same issue. But the day you make a will is the day that they put a wedge in it and stop the door.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's a great way to kind of end these issues, nip them in the bud before they even start.
I love a metaphor.
I have a question. What happens to someone who's inherited property who doesn't have the money to pay the inheritance tax? Do they still get the property?
So what typically happens is in those cases is we get them into a payment plan for the inheritance taxes. And it can vary based on your income. I was hesitant to say vary because they don't give you much wiggle room, but they tend to vary the payments based on your income. So folks can get into something that's affordable. But in the meantime, it sits in the same spot it's at when you started. Although the work's begun and you're making the payments down, until you've paid off those inheritance taxes, the title's not going to be properly cleared and put into your name yet. So you need to finish that payment plan before it can be finalized, which is something we always try and navigate, because you don't want to put down $25 a month and then just have to wait on this problem for years to get resolved while you make these payments. If you can afford more, it's always helpful to do that. But with the clients we work with, that's not always the case. So we just try and get into something that's affordable for folks that can get this to where we need to go as quick as possible, basically.
And what if the person who's inheriting the property has been living in that property? Do they have to leave?
Usually no. That's the type of situation we find ourselves working with people the most in, is that it was either parents' property or grandparents' property, and they've always been living in it, and they continue to live in it. They have been, they are now, and they will be going forward. So the living circumstances don't really change much. It's just like getting the title into the proper name. In theory, I guess you could be foreclosed on by the mortgage company if you still have a mortgage outstanding on it, but it's very rare that you see those types of issues come up with a tangled title.
Good, that's humanitarian.
Charlie, do you have any thoughts on how to prioritize who gets helped? Because assume we cast a net and we find 10 houses that this is an issue for. Who do you choose first? The most recent, easiest, the oldest, idiosyncratic, all depends. I'm kind of flummoxed by this.
You and me both. Legal aid kind of always that triage model of trying to find like the most urgent need first. It can take on a lot of different forms what that looks like. Usually, well, for starters, I would say that we have certain eligibility requirement to work with legal aid in the first place. So that's usually pretty heavy screener for most people. For those who aren't familiar, we operate the same way the public defenders do in criminal court. So we have a financial eligibility level depending on how many people are in your household. If you're below that, then you can work with us. If you're above that, then you're considered able to pay for an attorney. That's not always the case, but you know, that's how it's treated. And then they have to pay for a private attorney to get assistance with this. So usually our financial eligibility screens out a large number of applicants. And then we go from there with who's eligible at that point and start looking at the length of time they've had it. How many, usually if they're contested, that's something we're not going to do. That's usually one of the criteria. If there's disagreements amongst the family about who the personal representative should be or who the executor should be, then that's usually something we're not going to get involved with, because that's going to have to go to a contested hearing. And there's a few different factors that go into it, but basically what I can say is we take them on a case-by-case basis.
Just out of curiosity, what is the current cutoff for, you know, a family of 4? I'm picking that.
I do not know off the top of my head. The number we use is 125% of the poverty line. So
Yeah, okay.
whatever the poverty line is for a family of 4, we'd be below 125% of that.
Got it. Okay, that's easy enough. So there may be, and I don't know the degree to which I'm a member of Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church, and we're looking at what we can do. I'm kind of wondering if something we might think about is to work with a group of people who don't qualify for help from legal aid. Now, I realize that so that might be a place for us to think about. Anyway, that's interesting.
What we typically do in those situations, and the lawyers on the call will be familiar with this. If folks are just above our income line or even way above it, sometimes we'll give them the lawyer referral service number for the Montgomery Bar Association. They do low bono type of cases, so they'll do, I think it's $40 for a half-hour intake session, and then if there's more work that needs to be done after that point, they can set up like a payment fee arrangement that's more affordable for folks, depending on the attorney they connect with, of course. But we tend to refer folks that way if they're not income eligible for us.
Do we have other questions? Anything? I didn't see anything in the chat. Okay. I guess that's it.
Charlie, that was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the thoughtful questions. I love when people ask questions. It's always because then I know what people are hung up on in my presentation. If there's no questions, then I assume I had a perfect presentation.
Actually, I have another question.
Same. Go ahead.
My husband and I are just 2 members of VMPC who have this interest and were asked to be on this committee. And so the question is, we have no legal training, and where could we be useful in any way? Is Carolyn on this call? Carolyn Cabaness? No. Okay. So, well, that's just a question. I don't know if there's any answer to it, because we're getting better informed, but next steps, like. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% hear what you're saying. And the goal of this presentation was just to be more informational, to let people know about what the issue is, and some of the hangups on that issue. But for folks that are working on this more directly, if you want to schedule some sort of follow-up training, I can do something much more in depth, talk about the actual legal process of it, what forms need to be filed, how it works from start to finish, kind of the nuts and bolts of it that would bore non-lawyers to death. But if there's something like that, if there's any interest in something like that, I'd be glad to coordinate something. So feel free to just shoot me an email, call, we can get something set up like that.
I have a question. This is Bob Overheiser. I'm also from Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church. Is there anything you're aware of, Charlie, that is an initiative in Montgomery County that's similar to what's going on in Philadelphia as far as an organization?
Not that I'm aware of. It's something I'd like to see, I think, going forward, because I do think Philadelphia is very proactive about handling these issues, and that's why I included a lot of the information about what they're doing. I think they can serve as a good model for what other counties can do to address the issue. I think the first step is just knowing where the problems are. And they did that fantastic study that highlighted what neighborhoods and census tracts have the most issues and what neighborhoods, which helps target outreach. It helps for community education purposes. And I think really the first step to getting something like that in place is just studying the problem, get commissioning something to figure out what neighborhoods and what boroughs have the highest rates of this and where the help's most needed. But no, there's nothing that I'm aware of off the top of my head.
So could we engage Pew somehow to do that in Montgomery County?
I suppose it's possible. I don't know how that process goes. I've never reached out to Pew proactively, but they've already, if they've already done the study in Philadelphia, I'm sure they have all the methodology in place to do it and just expand it out to the counties. I don't see why not.
It's really researching regulatory information, isn't it, mostly?
Yeah, it would mostly be cross-checking the property records with the death records, basically, and then finding which homes are currently owned by people that are deceased. That would be the easiest way to flag them.
Yeah.
Great,
You can
thanks,
like your
Charlie.
property records prior to 1900 or whatever. Search for properties where the owner was born before 1910, right? Like anybody born that long ago is almost definitely not still alive unless they're the oldest person on earth, stuff like that.
Thank you.
It would be interesting to know whether that's how that research was done, because you're right, that sounds like an easy way to do it. But how you get access to the data and then compare, in the city of Philadelphia, 2 million records is a little bit daunting. But they certainly
they
didn't
had
do
to
it
have
by
some
hand.
sort of AI or something screening through a lot of that data, because it's quite the haul, or quite the lift. I mean, to get all these numbers. Took them a couple of years to put this study out.
Yeah, fascinating. I know that there is a task force in Lower Merion Township to deal with this. I have the contact info for the staff person who's been tasked with it. I have not yet reached out to him, but that's on my to-do list. Bob Anime, he may want to be on the call when I talk to him. Scott Zoloff, who's a member of the congregation and a Lower Merion commissioner, seems very interested in it as well. So,
Well, I'm glad to hear this. It sounds like there's a growing involvement in this work, which is always good.
yeah,
It's got to start somewhere.
yeah, and there will be a couple of lawyers on the committee. I'm confident, at least one former lawyer.
We have about 10 minutes. Is there another question? If not, we'll just say thank you.
Is there a site recommend? You mentioned that you could go online to put together wills. Is there a particular site where it's just kind of like straightforward for that?
Off the top of my head, I could put something in the chat here.
Okay.
Plug my old employer, phillyvip.org, as always has a lot of great resources on these types of things. Some of them will be specific to Philadelphia County, so just keep an eye out for that.
Yep.
But wills tend to not fall into that trap. So if you go on their website, there's a whole section that's called Resource Guide, or just resources. You can filter by legal issue, and under wills, you'll see all kinds of information about how that works and sample forms and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And Charlie, you mentioned a checklist and email. I don't know that we have everyone's email. Is there a way that people can contact you and request? The
Yeah,
checklist?
absolutely. I can put my contact information in the chat. If anybody wants to hang on to this, I'll put my email and my phone number. If anybody has any questions, wants to get some extra resources, anything like that, feel free to reach out. That's all my contact information there. So I can share these resources like the checklist. That checklist I mentioned, by the way, is also going to be on Philly VIP's website. That's where we got it from. They're really the preeminent experts in this type of work, but they only do it in Philadelphia County. So like I said, keep in mind that there might be some Philadelphia specific things on there that might not apply to Montgomery County, particularly around the Tangled title fund and stuff, but I'd say 90% of the information is going to be the same.
Thank you. Was there ever a title you couldn't untangle?
Other than the money getting in the way, I would say no. That's really the big hang up, is just how expensive
Yeah.
this process is. But legally speaking, it's not that difficult to do. It's just finding the money to make it happen. That's the hard part.
Did I see something about, can your organization help? Or it sounded like there was a mechanism to support people who needed the money or what you're doing. Can private citizens help out?
I suppose so. I don't work in our grants department, so I'm not exactly sure how that the nuts and bolts of that work. But yeah, I mean, we apply for all kinds of grants, from nonprofits, from the state government, the local government, the federal government. You know, and the money doesn't really come to us. It's kind of a throughway. It's a pass through to the clients, because the money just gets spent on the administrative costs for them. So we try and just keep our ear to the ground and apply for grant programs as we see them available and so on, because with using our 501 status to try and help out. But yeah, I don't know if it was individuals. I guess you could always shoot me an email and I could ask some of my higher ups and see what the answer to that is, because I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, if you're a 501, and I'm not a lawyer to answer that question, every donation I make is to a 501. So.
Yeah, we do take individual donations. Like, we have a donation link on our website, but I don't know, I'm not exactly sure where that money gets off to when people donate. I think it just goes into our general fund.
Countdown for 7 minutes. We have time for another question. Every time I say that, someone thinks of something to ask. So one more time. Okay, if that's it, then thank you so much for
Yeah,
your
thanks.
experience and wisdom and enthusiasm.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. I enjoyed being here.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Happy MLK Day. Everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.